This episode is a fictional narrative anthology presented in a true story style. Names and details are changed or invented for privacy and storytelling. When people say home alone, they think of a quiet house. They think of freedom.
I remember the opposite. I remember the way silence can feel. Occupied.
And I need to admit something before we begin. There were nights I should have called someone.
There were nights I should have left. I didn't. Welcome back to Night Protocol Files.
Tonight is 4 confessions about being alone at night. As a kid, as a teenager,
As someone who was sure they understood safe. These aren't stories about monsters under beds. They're stories about doors that didn't stay where you left them, and lights that felt like signals. And the awful moment you realize a house can hide a person the way it hides dust.
If you're listening in bed, keep your lights low. Keep your volume low. And if this feels familiar,
Don't blame yourself. Most of us were taught to be brave, not careful.
Case file 01, the spare key. I was 10 when my parents decided I was old enough to be home alone for an hour. Just an hour. Just long enough for groceries. My mom did what moms do when they're trying to feel less guilty. She made rules. Don't answer the door. Don't open the windows. Don't tell anyone I'm alone. And then she handed me the one rule that mattered most. If you get scared, lock the deadbolt.
Then call me. I nodded like I understood. Like fear was something you could schedule.
Before she left, my dad knelt by the front step and lifted the doormat. He showed me the spare key. Just in case, he said. I remember how casual he was. How normal. He put the mat back down and smiled like he'd just solved a problem.
I watched them back out of the driveway. I watched the taillights disappear. Then the house changed.
Not dramatically. Not like a movie. It just emptied. Even the refrigerator hum sounded farther away. I sat in the living room with cartoons on, volume higher than my parents liked.
Because loud felt like company. 15 minutes passed, then 20. I started to relax. And that's when I heard the front porch creak. At first, I told myself it was the wood settling, temperature changing.
But the creak happened again, slow, weighted, like a person shifting their stance. I muted the TV.
The silence after muting is always louder than the silence before.
I sat very still, listening for the next sound to explain the last one. Nothing. Then the doormat shifted. Not dragged, not kicked, lifted. A soft scrape. Then the faintest tap of something hard on concrete. A key. My throat tightened. I stood up too fast and felt dizzy. I didn't run to the door. I didn't do anything brave. I went to the hallway and stared at the deadbolt like it might save me if I stared hard enough.
Then, very quietly, I slid it into place. The click was small.
But in a quiet house, small sounds are announcements. The porch went silent. I waited for someone to knock. No knock. Instead, I heard the doorknob turn. Slowly.
Whoever was out there expected it to open. The knob turned once, then again, then stopped.
A pause. Then another turn, slightly harder. The deadbolt held.
I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding.
And then something happened that still makes me feel cold. A voice, right against the wood. Not threatening, just familiar, like a neighbor. Hello? Again? I couldn't place the voice, but it sounded like someone trying to be gentle. And that's what made it worse. Because gentle is how you get kids to cooperate. I didn't answer. I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. Then I remembered my mom's rule. Call me. My hands shook so badly the phone receiver slipped when I lifted it. Landline. Corded. The kind that sat in the kitchen like a piece of furniture. I dialed my mom.
It rang once, twice, and while it rang, I realized something I hadn't thought about before.
If someone was at the front door and my parents were gone,
How did they know I was here? The voice on the other side of the door spoke again.
Sweetie, it's okay. I just need to come in for a second. Sweetie. That word made my stomach drop. Because it wasn't what strangers say.
It's what people say when they want to sound like they belong. My mom answered the phone.
I didn't even say hello. I just whispered, "Someone's at the door." My mom went sharp instantly. The way her voice changed told me she believed me.
are you locked? Yes. Deadbolt? Yes. Go to your room, right now. Lock your door.
I ran down the hallway. I locked my bedroom door and sat on the floor behind it, knees to my chest, phone pressed to my ear like it was oxygen. My mom told me to stay quiet. And while she talked,
told my dad to turn the car around.
I heard the sound that convinced me I wasn't imagining anything. The doorknob turned again, harder, then a scrape, low and metallic, like a key trying to find a place it didn't fit. Not the knob, the lock. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stop myself from making noise.
And the worst part is, I could tell they were being careful, not panicked, not desperate, careful.
As if they had time. The scraping stopped. Silence. Then footsteps down the porch steps. 1, 2.
Then nothing. My mom kept me on the line until I heard my dad's car in the driveway. My dad rushed in, angry and out of breath. He checked the door. He checked the windows.
He walked the yard like he could still catch someone. He didn't. No one saw anyone. No one found anything. For a week, my parents tried to convince me it was a misunderstanding. Maybe someone got the wrong house. Maybe they thought the spare key was theirs. Maybe.
But 2 nights later, my dad lifted the doormat and froze. The spare key was gone.
And in its place was a different key. Not ours. I don't know what lock it belonged to. But I know what it meant. Someone had been close enough to trade keys like a message.
And my parents quietly stopped leaving me alone after that. They never said why. They didn't have to.
Case file 02. The upstairs footsteps. When I was 13, I became what people call a latchkey kid. I walked home from school. I let myself in. I made a snack. I waited.
My parents called it independence. I called it long afternoons. Our house was small, but it had one feature I hated: the staircase. It wasn't steep.
It wasn't fancy. It was just open enough that you could stand in the living room and look up into a dim second-floor hallway.
And at night, that hallway looked like a place the house didn't want you to see.
One winter afternoon, I got home and the air felt wrong immediately. Not cold.
Like the house had been waiting for me. I did the usual things. Door locked behind me.
Backpack down. Microwave. Snack. I turned on the TV and sat on the couch.
I told myself I was relaxing, but my body stayed tense, like it was listening for something my mind hadn't approved yet. About 10 minutes later, I heard a sound from upstairs. A footstep. One, then another.
Like someone walking carefully on carpet. I paused the TV, listened. The footsteps stopped.
I waited for the next sound to prove I'd imagined it. Instead, I heard something even smaller.
A soft creak, like a knee bending. Then a shuffle. My mouth went.
No answer. I called again, louder. Still nothing. And then, from the a door opening. Not wide, just enough to break the seal of stillness. I stared at the staircase. The upstairs hallway was dark, but not fully. A little gray light leaked from a window at the end.
Enough to see a shape if it moved. Nothing moved.
I told myself it could be the house settling, or a draft pulling a door. But we didn't have drafts in winter. We had sealed windows and heavy heat.
I walked to the base of the stairs and looked up. The darkness looked back.
I didn't go up. I'm not proud of how long I stayed frozen there.
Trying to decide if fear was rational enough to justify action. Then I did something stupid. I stepped onto the first stair. It creaked, and immediately the upstairs hallway responded. A footstep, right above me. Not walking away, not approaching, just repositioning. Like whatever was up there had heard me.
I backed down, heart pounding, and that's when my phone buzzed. A text from my mom. Running late.
Be home soon. I typed, "Are you upstairs?" No reply. I stared at the staircase again.
Then my phone buzzed a second time. Another text. Why? My fingers shook as I typed. I heard footsteps. A pause. Then, stay downstairs. Call your dad.
I called my dad. He answered on the second ring. I tried to keep my voice steady.
He told me to lock myself in the bathroom and wait for him. So I did. I sat on the bathroom floor with the lights on and the fan running.
Because noise felt like armor. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. No footsteps, no doors.
And I started to feel ridiculous. Like I'd overreacted.
Then, very softly, above the bathroom ceiling, I heard it again. A footstep.
And this time, it moved. Not quickly, not dramatically.
Back and forth, like pacing. I pressed my hand over my mouth and tried not to make any sound.
And then I heard the worst part. A soft, slow drag. Like something being pulled. My dad arrived fast. He didn't knock. He came in like he owned the air.
He searched the house with a kind of anger that looked like fear in disguise. Upstairs rooms, closets, under beds, nothing. The attic access was in the upstairs hallway.
A small square hatch in the ceiling with a pull cord. My dad pulled it down.
Dust fell like gray snow. He stared up into the darkness for a long moment.
Then he said, "Did you ever go up there?" I said no. He nodded, and his face tightened. He climbed up a step stool and shined a flashlight into the attic.
The beam caught something that made him go still.
I couldn't see what it was from where I stood.
But I saw the way his grip tightened on the ladder. He reached up with 2 fingers and pulled something down. A strip of fabric, dirty, frayed, not insulation, not a curtain, a piece of clothing. My dad didn't explain.
He just told me to pack a bag. That night, we stayed at my aunt's house.
The next day, my parents had a company come check the attic. They told me later it was animals, but I heard my parents whispering in the kitchen when they thought I was asleep. I heard the words crawl space. I heard someone could fit. And once I heard my mom say, "I thought we'd notice." Years later, I went back to that house for the first time in a long time. I stood at the base of the stairs and looked up at the hallway. And I realized what scared me most wasn't the footsteps.
It was how normal it became to live with the idea that a person could have been above me for days, and I wouldn't have known.
Case file 03, the babysitting rule. I was 16 when I started babysitting. I told myself it was easy money.
I told myself I was responsible. I told myself I was brave enough to sit in someone else's house at night and feel normal. The East Asian family lived in a nice neighborhood, the kind with trimmed lawns and porch lights that made the street feel safe.
The first few times were fine. 2 kids, cartoons, bedtime. Then the parents would leave, and I'd settle into that late night quiet.
Quiet that feels expensive in someone else's home. One night, the parents rushed out quicker than usual.
The dad handed me the baby monitor and said,
If it makes any noise, it's probably just static.
Then he paused, and he added, quietly, "Don't go into the basement."
I laughed a little because I thought he was joking. He didn't laugh. He just said, "The door sticks. It can lock behind you." Then he left.
And suddenly I was alone with 2 sleeping kids and a rule that didn't belong in casual conversation.
I locked the front door. I checked it twice. I made myself a cup of water I didn't drink.
Then I sat on the couch with the baby monitor on the cushion beside me. The house was quiet in the way a museum is quiet. Even the clock sounded polite.
At around 10:40, the baby monitor crackled, a burst of static, then silence. I looked at it, waited.
Another crackle. Then, very faint, a sound like breathing. I leaned in closer to the monitor, holding my own breath, and the breathing stopped. Like it had noticed. I told myself it was interference, a neighbor's monitor. They used similar frequencies. That's what I'd heard. That's what people say when they don't want to imagine the other option.
A few minutes later, the monitor crackled again. This time, through the static, I heard something that turned my stomach.
A whisper, not clear enough to understand, but clear enough to recognize as a voice. And it wasn't coming from the kids' room. It sounded closer, like it was in the hallway. I sat up straight. The house stayed quiet. The kids stayed asleep. The monitor crackled once more.
And the whisper came again, more distinct. It sounded like a sentence said under someone's breath.
I couldn't make out the words, but I could make out the tone. It was patient, as if whoever was whispering had time. I stood up and walked to the base of the stairs.
Listened. No footsteps, no movement. I looked up toward the kids' rooms. Dark, still.
I told myself the monitor was picking up something else. Some other house. Some other hallway. Some other babysitter. Then the monitor made a sound that was not static. A click.
A clean, metallic click, like a door latch. And immediately after, a second click, like a chain.
My heart started to pound hard enough to make me dizzy. Because I had checked the doors.
I knew what our front door sounded like. But this sound was different. Lower. Heavier.
Basement doors have a different weight to them. They don't sound like exits. They sound like storage.
Like containment. I turned and looked at the basement door.
It was in the kitchen, half hidden behind the pantry wall. I hadn't paid attention to it before.
Now it felt like it had been waiting for me to notice. The door was closed.
But the knob was turned slightly, as if someone had recently touched it.
I took one step toward it. Then I stopped, because I remembered the dad's voice.
Don't go into the basement. The door sticks. It can lock behind you. I backed away. And that's when I heard it. Not through the monitor. In the house.
A soft sound, coming from the kitchen. A whisper, right behind the basement door. So faint I wondered if my brain invented it. Then it came again. A little clearer.
Like someone testing the air. I couldn't understand the words, but I understood the intention. Someone was trying to make me closer. I picked up my phone and called the mom. Straight to voicemail. I called the dad. Voicemail. I called again. Nothing.
My hands shook as I texted, "Is someone supposed to be in the house?" No reply.
The basement door made a small sound. A creak. Not opening, just shifting.
Like pressure on the other side. I backed up into the living room, keeping my eyes on that door like it was a mouth. Then the baby monitor crackled again. And this time, the whisper came through, clear enough to catch one word.
Hell. I turned it off. I didn't think. I didn't analyze.
I turned it off like you'd turn off a stove that was leaking gas. The house was silent.
But my ears kept ringing with that word. Hello. I decided to leave. Just to the porch. Just to be near the streetlights. Just to feel seen. I walked to the front door, unlocked it, stepped outside, and locked it behind me.
And I stood on the porch with my phone in my hand, trying to breathe normally.
I was still deciding what to do. Still deciding whether I was being dramatic. When I noticed something that made my blood go cold. The porch light was off.
This family always kept it on, and the switch was inside.
I stared at the dark bulb above my head, like it had betrayed me. Then I looked down through the glass of the front door, into the hallway. And for just a second, I saw movement. Not a person, not a clear figure.
Just a shadow shifting where no shadow should shift. I didn't go back in. I walked down the porch steps and stood under the neighbor's porch light like a kid again.
I called the parents until someone answered. When the dad finally picked up, his voice sounded annoyed until he heard mine.
I said, "I'm outside. Something's wrong." There was a pause.
Then he said, very quietly, "Did you go near the basement?" "No," I whispered. "I didn't." He let out a breath like relief. "Good," he said. "Stay outside. I'm coming home."
They came back fast. The dad went straight to the kitchen, straight to the basement door. He looked at the knob. Then he looked at the chain lock. Then he looked at me.
And he didn't ask what I heard. He asked one thing. "Did you turn the porch light off?"
I shook my head. He nodded like he already knew. That night, they paid me extra.
They didn't explain why. They never called me again. And I never babysat in that neighborhood after dark.
Because the truth is, if a house has a rule, it's usually because the house taught someone a lesson.
Case file 04, Borv, the phone that rang. The last file is the one that still visits me when I can't sleep.
It's the one that made me realize how easily a safe home can become a stage.
I was 17. My parents were out for the evening. Not late. Just dinner and a movie.
I had the house to myself. I did what teenagers do. I sprawled on the couch.
I ate something directly out of the container. I turned the TV on louder than it needed to be.
I felt free. Around 9:30, the landline rang. We still had one then. Old habit, old number. The ring startled me in a quiet house the way a shout startles you in a library. I picked it up without thinking. Hello? Silence. Then a soft click. Then just present. I waited. Then I said hello again. And a voice, low and calm, said, "Is your porch light on?" My skin tightened. It wasn't a question like a telemarketer asks. It was a question like someone checking a plan.
I said, "Who is this?" The voice didn't answer. Instead, it repeated, "Is your porch light on?" I hung up. I stared at the receiver for a second like it had bitten me. Then I laughed, a small, embarrassed laugh, because I wanted it to be nothing. Wrong number. Prank call. Kids. I turned the TV up a little, and then the phone rang again. Same ring, same insistence. I let it ring. It rang 7 times before it stopped. Then, immediately, it rang a 3rd time. I stood up and unplugged the phone from the wall. I remember thinking that was clever. Like I'd removed the problem. The house was quiet again. I sat back down and tried to forget. 5 minutes later, the phone rang. The unplugged phone rang. Not loudly. Not fully. A faint electronic chirp, like a ghost of a ring. But it was unmistakable. I froze, because the sound couldn't exist. Not unless something was wrong with reality, or with the phone. I walked into the kitchen and stared at the unplugged cord. The receiver sat in its cradle. Still. Then the faint ring came again, like it was coming from inside the plastic itself.
I backed away slowly, heart pounding. And then the TV in the living room flickered. Not static.
Not channel change. Just a brief dimming, like a blink. I walked back to the living room. The TV was still on, but the volume was lower. I hadn't touched it. I stood there listening. The house felt attentive, like it was waiting to see what I would do. I went to the front window and looked outside. The porch light was on.
I was sure I hadn't turned it on. I stared at it, trying to remember if I'd hit the switch earlier without noticing.
Then I saw something that made my breath catch. A figure at the edge of the yard. Not close enough to see a face. Just a shape in the dimness, half hidden behind a tree. Still, watching. I stepped back from the window. I turned off the porch light from the switch near the door. The bulb outside went dark, and immediately the landline chirped again. That faint, impossible ring. I felt my eyes sting with panic, because suddenly it wasn't a call. It was a response. I didn't know what to do with that. I did the only thing I could think of. I turned the porch light back on. The yard brightened. The figure was gone. I stood there with my hand still on the switch, trying to understand if I was bargaining with something. The phone stayed silent for maybe 30 seconds.
Then, from the other side of the front door,
I heard a sound so soft I almost missed it. A gentle knock, not loud, polite. One knock, then a pause, then another. I didn't move. The knock came again.
And then a voice through the door said, "Hello?" Same word from the babysitting monitor.
I backed away from the door. My hands were shaking.
I reached for my cell phone and called my dad. He answered quickly. I told him, "Someone's outside." My dad said, "Are you locked in?" "Yes." "Is the porch light on?"
That question made my stomach drop all over again, because he asked it like he already understood something.
I said yes. He said, "Good. Stay where you are. Do not turn it off. I'm coming home now." The voice outside the door spoke again. Not angry. "You don't have to be scared," it said. "I just want to talk." I didn't answer. The doorknob turned once, then stopped, then turned again, slightly harder, then stopped. Like they were testing what kind of lock we had. My dad stayed on the line with me until I heard my parents' car. The porch light stayed on. The moment my dad's headlights hit the driveway, the knocking stopped. No footsteps. No retreat, just absence. My dad stormed inside, checked the door, checked the yard. He didn't find anyone. But he did find something else. A piece of tape on the porch light switch outside. A small strip, neatly placed,
like someone had marked it.
As if the light was part of a routine.
My dad peeled it off and didn't speak for a long time.
Later, he told me something I'd never heard before. He said, "When I was a kid, my mom used to say, 'Keep a porch light on when you're home. It tells people you're awake. It tells people you're not alone.'" He looked at me with an expression that made my skin crawl. "And sometimes," he added, "it tells the wrong people exactly what they need."
If you grew up being home alone, you probably learned to ignore fear. You learned to treat it like a childish thing.
But fear is just your brain counting details faster than you can explain. Tonight's files weren't about ghosts.
They were about the way a house can become a signal.
And the way someone can read that signal. If you want more case files like this, subscribe to Night Protocol Files.
And if you're ever alone at night and you hear a sound that doesn't belong,
Don't prove you're brave, prove you're gone. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next file.